For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dhlamini. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss understanding Feesmustfall campaign. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
While protests have stopped at VETs, UCT and roads, we know that there is still a level of chaos in some, possibly like at the NWU. Is the Feesmustfall campaign like falling apart now?
You know, it's not easy as an outsider to follow what's happening because I think that the press coverage has been very weak. What happens at UCT and VITS, to some extent roads, is very well covered. But we don't get coverage of things at TUT except as some sort of violence, NWU, and yesterday there was, for the last few days, there has been a restive situation at UJ and it's hardly been covered. I see today it is in the Star. I'm not sure there was much in the Times. I haven't finished the business day yet, but it got very, very little coverage. And the coverage on the on ENCA was very partial, very limited. Sometimes it wasn't on the bulletin. And it appears like there were serious assaults on students by private security at UJ. So it's been quite difficult to understand what's going on because sometimes you see a headline. I'm thinking now of a few weeks back of violence, or there was this claim that Adam Habib was being held hostage. And it was nonsense. He was sitting there with the students and he was talking with them. They didn't want him to leave, but had he wanted to leave, they would not have stopped him. And I just think that the media in South Africa doesn't really take the trouble to understand protest movements. They're still not comfortable with protest movements. And I think all of us are not comfortable in the sense of not really understanding that 21 years into democracy, you have this generation who were born in a democratic South Africa, or after the unbanning of organizations. They are now standing up for rights and demands which ought to have been realized since in the last 21 years, and they are being beaten. And according to the Commissioner of Police in Parliament, they used a minimum force. They acted with restraint. Now, I don't accept this, especially in Parliament, where they came with no weapons and they were hit and they had these stun grenades fired at them, and one person's foot, you could see there, been very badly injured through the stun grenades. So that's one thing, is that the media doesn't help us, but it's also difficult to understand fully because it's not one thing. On the one hand, in some ways, we don't see conventional leadership structures in the front in these protests, or if the SOC is leading it, it is also having to report to a larger student body who are in many cases seen as the main decision-making body. So that makes it difficult. In some cases there's tensions between the SOC and the rest of the student body, as in UWC, to some extent VITS. Another thing is the demands are not exactly the same. Feesmustfall was a common demand, but not all universities are preoccupied with symbolisms, with symbols like Rhodes at UCT and at Rhodes University. It's less prominent at places which don't have long histories, like Northwest University, NMMU in Port Elizabeth. You don't find it as much there. It is a big factor in Stellenbosch. So you have these differences, but also you have ideologically very distinct, very different trends, I think. On the one hand, the black consciousness and Africanist trend seems to be very present because there's the use of the word Azania for South Africa. UCT's administrative buildings, they're calling Azania House. The people end their statements sometimes by Mayibuye Azania. Now that's a very different tradition from the ANC, and people who've come from that tradition. Also, along with Fanon, there is a resurgence of black consciousness and the ideas of Steve Biko. So that's very, very important. So we need to understand that there are these trends, but it may still be that the majority of those protesting are actually ANC members or ANC supporters. It's possible. Certainly the SLC leadership at Wits were ANC members wearing ANC colours, and that is a source of controversy, but may well be that that is an important trend, and it would be interesting to know to what extent this is having an impact within the ANC, because they are making demands relating to unfinished business. The fact that 21 years into democracy, people are excluded from universities or can't get their certificates when they've passed because of debt. Now, ANC pledged to make a better life for all, and in this respect, it seems to have been inadequate in its responses, and it would be interesting to know what effect this has had. It seems now they are trying at the moment to embrace the Feesmustfall protest as their own, because they were caught by surprise, but now they've decided it's too big. Even if it's diffuse, even if it's got different ideologies and all of this, there is a basic commonality which the ANC has felt it is important to embrace.
But now, how do they take forward the demands for free education as well as curriculum change?
You see, free education, you can make a generalized demand, and it may be accepted in principle, although it said free education is intended not for everyone, but for those who can't afford it. But you need to develop a model of how that will be realized. And the students don't actually have the expertise to provide that model. So they need to have a body of scholars who they can draw on, who can assist them. Now, this very often happens with political movements or social movements, that they have a panel of experts who help them. They need to find people who can say, these are the alternative ways of doing it. If you do it this way, it won't do this. If you do it that way, it will achieve this, that, and the other. The trouble, however, when you use experts is that experts tend to be very egocentric, and they don't always like to recognize that they are not there to come back with any old thing like it's impractical. They are there to find a way of having equal access to education. They must understand, they must find a way, and they must explain it to the students, empower them to take it forward themselves. So that's the one thing with the the realizing of equal access, you do need economists, other people to assist. With the curriculum change, you have the problem that the people who will have to implement it are those, primarily those who have been teaching the curriculum that they don't approve of. The colonial type curriculum, although that's not to say every teacher just teaches what comes from the North or from Britain or United States, but you're going to ask people, because you may appoint new professors, and not every black professor is committed. We must not assume that every black professor is automatically committed to decolonizing knowledge and curricula. But you may get these new professors as well, and they have to teach these new curricula. Again, I think you need a panel of scholars who you trust, who sit with the students, discuss with them the options, and I think they also need to make contact with organizations of African scholars, like there's this one in Dakar, Codesria, Council for something of Social Science Research, very good organization. Get their assistance in drawing up curricula, as well as contact with other parts of the South, especially India. Now there is some contact with India, but apart from Africa, other parts of the South and Indian scholarship is very, very impressive in some respects. So I think it's important for students to recognize that to take forward decolonizing means there are some teachers who are already teaching in an emancipatory way, sitting with them and asking them who else can be involved in curriculum change.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about understanding the #Feesmustfall campaign.